Okay, let's do it. Um, Today I put out on my Substack a piece called Understanding 9/11 to Understand Our World, the Eerie Reality of Dark Ritual. Now, I'm aware that that's a fairly ominous title for a Substack piece, but I'm going to explain a little bit about it. I still want you to go read the Substack piece. It's down below, but I wanted to offer just a little bit of context here and then maybe let some viewers know that that Substack has been written. Now, I've got maybe about 70, around 70, maybe not quite 70 pieces on Substack that I've published. I've only had a Substack for a couple of months. I don't know, maybe less than 6 months. Most of my pieces, like around 90%, give or take, are free, you know, and even the ones that I paywall, the paywall is generally well down into the text. So I try to be very judicious about what I put behind a paywall. I try to be kind of as as liberal as I can be in terms of, liberal in giving as much of myself as I can. But I do make a tiny amount of money off my Substack. That is true. I don't feel bad about that. You know, anybody who knows me knows that the career that I walked away from, I refuse to work for the government. I don't want to work for some soulless corporation. I have found other ways that I feel more aligned with my values in order to sustain myself. And one of those is writing. And I tell you, some of the pieces that I write, like they take forever to write and they require me to read, even if it's stuff that I've already read. So I'm familiar with the material. I still have to go back and like meticulously read, take notes, and then cite all the information that I put into the Substack. So yes, some of them I put behind a paywall. It is what it is. So it's a minimal amount of what I put on Substack. That's my point. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about today was this Substack piece that I wrote and how I came across this idea. So there are a couple of different ways in which to look at 9/11. There are a couple of different ways or levels at which we could understand the event. Even within the truth community. So I would say those who already understand that 9/11 is not what we're told in terms of the official narrative. Even within the truther community, there still can be significant deficiencies in that community's understanding as to what really happened. And I am not telling you that I have an extremely clear understanding of an extremely complex incident. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is I have known that 9/11 was an inside job since the summer of 2007. So for 16 years. And my understanding of that day is significantly more nuanced now than it was 16 years ago, when I would already have admitted to you that, yeah, it was an inside job. So a while back, I can't remember exactly when, I came across this book. So this is a book by, you can see the name down there at the bottom, Joseph P. Farrell. The book, I mean, the title is like pretty significant. They typically are for his books, but it's called Hidden Finance, Rogue Networks, and Secret Sorcery. That's a pretty typical title for a Joseph Farrell book. And the subtitle is The Fascist International, 9/11 and Penetrated Operations. Now, Joseph Farrell is an eccentric guy, and I mean that in a very good way. He is an extremely thorough researcher who is multidisciplinary in his approach. Now, he personally has a PhD in patristics, which is the study of the church fathers, like the study of the Christian church fathers. So he has a PhD in patristics from Oxford University, but his breadth and depth of knowledge across a wide array of fields is astounding. And he's written close to 40 books. I have quite a few of them. I don't know. I probably have a dozen of them. And they are in depth. They are broad and deep. So with this book, that's kind of what I expected. I expected him to draw a synthesis from a lot of different areas and kind of weave together this elaborate claim about 9/11. And that's exactly what I got. But in reading the book, and I don't want to explain too much about the book because there's one part that I want to focus on. But he makes an argument that 9/11 is much more than the official story, and we all would be like, yeah, of course, got it. But he would say it's even much more than an inside job. It goes beyond that, and to some degree, it was a penetrated operation, which means some other outside, globalist group came in and kind of usurped the operation or penetrated it from those in the military intelligence apparatus, so an arm of the deep state. So this globalist faction kind of came in and penetrated what otherwise would have been just a deep state inside job. And it's a fascinating claim, and I think he makes a great argumentation for it. That's not necessarily what I want to focus on. He has a chapter here at the end called The Esoteric Enigma. And he opens it with an epigraph from Peter Levenda. So Peter Levenda, another, kind of well-known conspiracy researcher. Peter Levenda writes the prologue for another book that Farrell relies heavily on in his chapter. I'm going to get to that book in a second. So this is Farrell's book, a chapter called The Esoteric Enigma. He begins the chapter with an epigraph that comes from Peter Levenda, who writes the prologue for another book. Got it. There's a lot of intertextuality. I'm going to talk about several books here, all of which are cited extensively in the Substack that I wrote. All right. So Farrell citing Levenda. By choosing to see 9/11 as a ritual on a massive scale, we paradoxically may better be able to understand it, to accommodate its message on a psychological, even spiritual level. Okay, so Farrell citing Levenda in the prologue for this book. All right, this book, very superlative title, called The Most Dangerous Book in the World, 9/11 as Mass Ritual. You can see at the top it mentions Peter Levenda. Peter Levenda writes the prologue. Okay, so I'm reading this book from Farrell. In reading this book from Farrell, he mentions this book called The Most Dangerous Book in the World. And here's what Farrell says about this book. When I had first finished reading S.K. Bain's The Most Dangerous Book in the World, 9/11 as Mass Ritual, I had to sit quietly for several minutes. It was as if I had been shocked back into reality, or perhaps into a different reality altogether. The reality that we think humanity left long ago, but which in point of fact, it did not. For those with an eye to magic and ritual like myself, it was clear that on 9/11 itself, that what we were witnessing was a gigantic working of ritual magic. All right, skipping down. Bain's book confirms the worst suspicions of those who saw the symbols being manipulated on that day and then some. Okay, so Farrell then mentions this book by S.K. Bain, The Most Dangerous Book in the World, 9/11 as Mass Ritual. He then cites, as the epigraph to that chapter, he then cites Peter Levenda, who wrote the prologue to this book. All right, so what is this book and how does it get away with such a title? This book is this book explains 9/11, obviously as a mass ritual, but what it does is it explains 9/11 as if it were a script or or like the plot development for a play or a novel or even a movie, and that this was done deliberately by those who plotted the attacks, and then it was meant to be an occult event. So it wasn't just an attack that killed people, it was far more than that. Okay, so what do we mean by that? It means that it's not just that people were murdered on 9/11, which clearly they were. It's that it was a ritual murder. It was, quite accurately, a human sacrifice, and that there is a lot of evil, demonic imagery that was used in order to deliberately invoke evil as part of the event. Now, you may think that that sounds crazy. Okay, cool, I got it. You may think that. I don't think it's crazy. And I've read the book. I think the argument is compelling. Now, when I say the argument is compelling, that does not necessarily mean that I agree with every single point in the book. It does mean that I agree with the main thrust of the argument put forward by S.K. Bain, the author. It does mean that I believe that he accurately identifies a lot of the dots and then adeptly kind of connects those dots. Other people might think, you know what, some of the dots aren't really there. Okay, I got it. And you might also think, and maybe he's not as adroit as you might say in connecting at least some of the dots. Okay, sure. Maybe in some instances he's reaching. Maybe in some instances his claims are a little out there. Sure. Okay. That doesn't mean that his overall argument is wrong or even weak. It means that some of this is highly speculative, for sure, like admittedly. But this concords with my worldview, and I've explained my worldview before. Here's the thing. I'm a Christian, and I believe in a Christian worldview, which means that I believe that God operates liturgically, and that evil seeks to take that, usurp it, and then invert it, which means, evil people, if you want to say also demonic entities, also operate in this way, but they, invert it. So I think dark ritual is out there. When I say that we're in a spiritual war, I think this is the type of spiritual warfare that people don't want to talk. They don't know about, or they're afraid to talk about. And I think we need to talk about it. So in the Substack, I mentioned another author who wrote a book that is mentioned by S.K. Bain. So again, S.K. Bain's book, because I know I'm mentioning a lot of books here. S.K. Bain mentioned his book is the main book that I wrote about today, which is, of course, the most dangerous book in the world, 9/11 is Mass Ritual. S.K. Bain, in his book, references a pretty well-known researcher. Who's probably even a little bit controversial, but if you're a researcher in this field, you're going to be controversial. And that's Michael Hoffman. So this book by Michael Hoffman is called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. This is where the intertextuality is like at play. Farrell mentions S.K. Bain. I was familiar with Farrell as an author. I'd read, his books, some of them. And I learned about S.K. Bain's book, The Most Dangerous Book in the World. S.K. Bain, in his book, relies on some of the research of Michael Hoffman, an author that I'm also familiar with. Michael Hoffman then writes, that book is called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Michael Hoffman later writes a book called Twilight Language. In Twilight Language, which came out after The Most Dangerous Book in the World, Michael Hoffman references S.K. Bain's reliance on Hoffman's earlier book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. You don't need to remember that. That's not going to be on the test. And he says, hey, Bain, cited me and relied on some of my previous work, which Hoffman is appreciative of. Now, he goes on to say, hey, I don't necessarily agree with all of Bain's premises. That's okay. We don't expect any two authors to completely concur with one another when they're writing about the same topic, even if they are generally on the same side. That doesn't mean that Hoffman rejects or does not necessarily endorse Bain's book. It just means, hey, he relied on me in some of my research. Doesn't necessarily mean that I agree 100% with everything that he puts forward in his book. I got it. That's great. No big deal. But what is Twilight language that Hoffman mentions in this book? Well, let's figure it out, because that's going to play into what we're talking about and what I was mentioning in my Substack. So this book opens with an inclusion of an interview between Hoffman and some interviewer. And the interviewer says in the interview, it's a pretty significant interview, what is Twilight language? Now, Hoffman is like a super erudite guy. This is a compliment, but it's not going to sound like one. But he can use elaborate language to communicate more than the average person can probably take in. And he's one of these people who will use 50 words to communicate what other people could say in 30. Now, he will communicate more, but a lot of it's going to be missed. He's an elaborate speaker. He has a command of the English language that a lot of people will never, ever achieve, even a fraction of. Okay, got it. The interviewer says, what is Twilight language? Hoffman starts to answer. He says, this is Hoffman. There is going to be difficulty among the masses and even conspiracy students and investigators concerning the language which speaks in ways that are non-linear to most minds. Twilight language is a form of communication that eludes most people's conscious perception, though it is, of course, perceived by the subconscious. I'm going to read that again because this is super important. We got to understand this. There is going to be difficulty among the masses and even conspiracy students and investigators concerning the language which speaks in ways that are non-linear to most minds. Twilight language is a form of communication that eludes most people's conscious perception, though it is, of course, perceived by the subconscious. Okay. So Hoffman is explaining to us, hey, there's a lot of symbolism and imagery that is being used that not just the average person, but that the majority of people are never going to overtly recognize. And they're not supposed to. It's not intended for them. All right. Even conspiracy researchers or students of conspiracy, people who are well versed in this, people who have an eye for this type of stuff, and a lot of times realize there's more there than what is on the surface, even they are going to miss it. Now, Farrell's a researcher who's been around a long time, and Farrell understands this stuff. Farrell said when he reads Bain's book, because he's a person who has an eye for ritual and magic, it resonates with him and he gets it. Hoffman is saying people like Farrell are the exception, and Farrell's an exceptional guy for sure. The average person is not going to catch this. Okay, let's go to the very beginning of the book. Hoffman says, this book is not a how-to manual to prevent being alchemically processed by the cryptocracy. All right, quick break. Cryptocracy is the word that Hoffman uses for the cabal, the overlords, the elite, whatever you want to call them, that try to run the world and run, control, or even destroy humanity. This book is not a how-to manual to prevent being alchemically processed by the cryptocracy. One cannot prevent a disease that has already metastasized. Neither is it a wake-up call. Since the gateway year 2000, we're going to come back to that, the majority of Americans have been processed as initiates. They are, quote, Masons on site, unquote, i.e. members of the secret society without knowing it. A wake-up call presupposes that people are asleep. They are only partly so. In their waking stages, they intuit that the cryptocracy in the United States engages in human sacrifice and occult process. This thrills them, and they keenly anticipate more thrills. At this stage in history, America is a carnival sideshow thrill dome, and we, the people, vie for a front row seat. Eternal salvation, the pursuit of truth and freedom, all that takes a back seat, despite the rhetoric. The alchemical processing of humanity is ahead of schedule. I'm skipping a little bit. Reality, facts, and truth are dispensable in the high echelons of the cryptocracy. Sorcery entails a calculus in which reality, facts, and truth are whatever the sorcerer declares them to be. So again, that's that. I just read the opening paragraphs of this book, Twilight Language. All right, from Michael Hoffman. The cryptocracy, Hoffman is saying, operates via Twilight language. Well, what is Twilight language? It is nonlinear. It uses esoteric symbols, or symbols with esoteric meanings that the majority of people are not going to comprehend consciously. They will comprehend it unconsciously or subconsciously, because I mean, this goes back to like Jung, who says that, you know, humans kind of have this innate ability to understand archetypes. The cryptocracy knows that. They know what they're doing when they're communicating with your subconscious. And they are performing rituals that we see, they're done all the time. And that by having these rituals performed in front of us, to some degree, we are participating in the ritual. We have become initiates. And I agree with all that. Now, where I slightly part company with Hoffman, or at least part company might be a strong term, but where I am hesitant to entirely concur is with kind of his dismal assessment. I don't want to say that he says it's hopeless. I don't think that's what he's saying. But he is saying, hey, this is not a wake-up call, because we're past being able to wake up. You know, the disease has already metastasized. He does say that. I believe, is that true? Is that not true? Hey, listen, I'm not here to say, but what I am here to say is I believe in fighting. I believe in resisting evil. I believe that God wins in the end. I want to be on God's side in my own small way, notwithstanding the fact that I am a very fallible human being as well, but just like everybody else. But, you know, God wins in the end. I want to be on God's side. Does that mean we win on this side or the next? I'm not here to say. You know, I don't know. I don't know how things shake out. But I'm going to fight. And that's part of the reason why I write what I write, or I make these videos, where I, you know, have made other decisions that I made. I want to be aligned with God. I want to be aligned with truth. I don't want to fight that. But yeah, I do believe this stuff happens. I do believe that as a society, we are being alchemically processed, as Hoffman says. Yeah, I think that's happening. And people who want to deny that, either because they come from a supremely materialistic paradigm, which I don't, you know, espouse, because I, you know, believe in I mean, obviously I have a theistic worldview. I mean, I've said that many times and I've written that many times. But yeah, I believe that this stuff is happening. So how bad is murder? I mean, murder is pretty bad, right? But if murder is like, you know, one of the worst things, or potentially the worst thing that you can do to another human being, and then we say, hey, 9/11 consisted in a bunch of murders. Well, what if then we relook at it and we say, it wasn't just that it was a bunch of murders, but that it was ritual murder. It was human sacrifice done to create dark energy or invoke demonic entities and their assistance. I'm not telling you that I understand exactly how that works. That is not my point. I'm telling you that I believe that is happening. I believe they do that. And just because you don't believe it necessarily because I know some people don't, doesn't mean that the cryptocracy, to use Hoffman's term, I don't exactly like that term, but I know why he uses it. Just because you don't necessarily believe it doesn't mean that they don't believe it, or at least that some of them do. I am one of those people who thinks that at the very top of this pyramid structure of whomever is aiming to control all of us, I do not believe that those people are atheists. I believe that those people are people who have deliberately chosen to follow evil, if that makes sense. That's as much as I'm going to say about that. And I think they use atheism for the masses to get people to follow, kind of this paradigm of rank materialism that deliberately leads to a dead end. But the people at the very, very, very top, this is my thought, this is my opinion, I believe that they know that God exists and that they have chosen to fight him. That is a deliberate choice that they have made. That is my thought. Maybe you slightly disagree on that, or maybe you entirely disagree. But when I talk about spiritual warfare, I believe that this is absolutely happening. Do I believe that a lot of entertainment is used ritualistically? Yes, I do. Do I believe that esoteric symbolism is used all over Hollywood, in music, even in the sports industry? Yes, I do. And I think that we should try to recognize it so that we can resist it in as much as possible. Does that mean that it's bad to watch movies? No, I'm not saying that. I think we should be judicious in the movies that we watch, etc. But it's also helpful to kind of understand what you're seeing. But, S.K. Bain in his book, at the opening, he says, "It is my sincerest hope that this book will help bring the true perpetrators of 9/11 to justice." He's not talking about, hijackers. "But after researching and writing this material, I no longer believe that doing so is a viable possibility." This book was written in 2012. So it's 2023, and no true perpetrator has been brought to justice for 9/11. All we did was put forth a fake commission. The 9/11 commission, totally fake. Just like the Warren Commission after the JFK assassination was totally fake. And then, Bain, again, "The best we can hope for is to expose and to resist." I agree with that. So we're in a war. That war is spiritual. That war includes liturgy and includes ritual. They can either be the way that God designed, or if we're talking about very evil people who do very evil things, they take God's systemic approach to worship that he has designed for us, understanding how he expects us to worship him in the way that is, most beneficial to us. And these evil people have kind of usurped it and inverted it, of course. So that's all I'm going to say. Here's what I don't want to do in this. I'm not going to go through and just, review this book. I want you to check this book out. Go read my Substack. I'll put it in the description below. I go through some of the symbolism that is used by Bain. And even in my Substack, I scratch the surface. Okay, scratch the surface. But I go through more there from Bain and Hoffman than I did in this video. But I want you to check out the book. Now, you can read Bain's book and you can totally disagree with it. Okay, cool, great. I got it. I commend you for reading it. The majority of people are going to dismiss this out of hand. Even the majority of people who come from a theistic paradigm. Okay. I personally think that's naive. But Hoffman told us most people are not going to understand Twilight language. It is what it is. All right. Thanks. I know this was a little bit convoluted. I know I was talking about a bunch of books and trying to explain how I read this book and learned about this book, etc. That was probably a little bit confusing. But anyway, thanks for sticking around. Go read Bain's books and, read Farrell and Hoffman too. All right. Have a good one.